Hey guys, Brian delivers you the goods here. I'm returning to you for a album review tonight for Ava Max's new record, Don't Click Play, that I got a chance to listen to for myself. See what I was going to think of this almost 35-minute record. So I'm going to discuss what I listened to for the 12 tracks on this 34.5-minute record, close to 35 minutes, and let you know my thoughts on the tracks overall. So, this whole album overall. So, let's dive into this album review. Now, it starts with the title track, Don't Click Play, which is actually a good song, but it wasn't like one of my favorites. I mean, it's got a catchy beat to it. I'll give it that. Much praise. But the song itself, with the execution of Ava Max's vocals, I don't know if it connected with me to where I liked it, but I think it was alright for how it sounded. So 4.5 out of 5 for the title track, Don't Click Play. How Can I Dance is a pretty good song in its own way. I mean, this was pretty catchy for sure. It's kind of like the same stuff from the last record, Diamonds and Dance Floors, but I would say Diamonds and Dance Floors was better, in my opinion. So overall, sorry, my dog was wanting to hop off the bed or whatever, so I was trying to move my other cat out of the way so he wouldn't hiss at my dog, Millie, or whatever. So basically, How Can I Dance is a 4.75 out of 5. Solid track. It works for the execution overall, and I think Ava Max's singing was pretty solid in this. Lovin' Myself was a good song, not one of my favorite singles. It was, I believe, the second single for this record. I'm glad she only dropped like 3 singles for this record. Sorry, that was my cat meowing. Titan. Being an orange fluffy kitty. So, basically, Lovin' Myself did have some good vocals from Ava Max, but it was the execution that was the thing with this track overall. So, I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5 for Lovin' Myself. Good song, not one of my favorites, but solid in its own way. Sucks to Be My Ex was a good song for how it sounds. I mean, the execution of the beat was pretty strong, but it was overall Ava Max's singing that was either good or bad. It was just iffy with me. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the best. So, 4.5 out of 5 for Sucks to Be My Ex. Wet Hot American Dream is the last single for the record, and it was the last song to be released before this album came out. And I'm glad she only dropped 3 singles for this record, because the rest of the songs we will go into discussion about. But overall, I think Wet Hot American Dream was a really good track. I really enjoyed this. Definitely something to play as a summer jam. And I really enjoyed Ava Max's singing in it. The music video was definitely a wet, hot American dream. I'm just kidding. But you get my gist on what I'm trying to say. But overall, I think with how Ava Max was singing this track, she did very well with this. So I really enjoyed it. 5 out of 5. Take My Call was a pretty good song in its own way. I'd give it a 4.75 out of 5 for this one. I think with how she was singing it, how the beat was sounding, was pretty solid enough to get through this track. So, pretty safe song for how it sounds execution-wise. Know Somebody was a good song, not one of my favorites, but it was a least favorite, but it wasn't the worst track. It was probably weaker than the last track, but it's overall good for how it sounds with Ava Max's singing and just with the execution of how the beat was and all that, and just the verses, the chorus. I think the verses were kind of the stale moments, but the chorus was the highlight in its own way. So 4.5 out of 5. Lost Your Faith was the first single for the record, and it is a pretty good song in its own way. It's not my particular favorite track, but it is probably the second favorite of the singles. I think Wet Hot American Dream takes the #1 spot as the best single she dropped for the final single. So overall, I think Lost Your Faith is a 4.75 out of 5. It's overall pretty solid for how it sounds. Fight for Me was a pretty good song in its own way. I'd give it a 4.75 out of 5 for this one. I just think Ava Max's singing overall did fairly well. And just with the execution and the beat and all that, it had moments where I was feeling for it, but some of the production of the electronic work, excuse my yawning, of the electronic work was fairly solid in its own way. It had its bumps in the road, but it overall did alright. So 4.75 out of 5. Skin in the Game was a pretty good song in its own way. I'd give it a 4.75 out of 5 for this one too. I think with how she was singing this track, it did fairly alright. And then you have like moments in the track where the verses were kind of stale. The chorus was pretty catchy for the most part, but I think execution wise with the production and the electronics, it played it safe, so 4.75 out of 5. World's Smallest Violin is the second to last track before you get to the closing track on the record, and it overall did pretty well in its own way. I'd give it a 4.75 out of 5. At least the lyrics kind of say it all. There were some cringe moments with the lyrics, and give me a second, I gotta pause the video. Hey guys, sorry about pausing the video. I had to help my mom out for a second. So, yeah, to get back on track, that was my dog that jumped up on my bed. To get back on track, World's Smallest Violin, pretty safe song, but the lyrics kind of are like a little cringy at times, but it executes alright with how Ava Max sings it. So 4.75 out of 5. And finally, Catch My Breath is the closing track, and it's actually a pretty good song with the beat. This and Wet Hot American Dream were the really strong tracks on this record. But overall, with how she was singing it and how the beat was sounding, did fairly well. So, dig this track. As the closing track, I definitely think it was a strong closing track. 5 out of 5. Overall production, mixing, and execution-wise, would I say this is better than Diamonds and Dance Floors? Not necessarily, but it's a good record. I think it's a little weaker than Diamonds and Dance Floors, but it's a good follow-up for how it sounds. For 12 songs and a runtime of 34 minutes, you're in for an interesting pop album to get you through the weekend and all that for the weekend of August 22nd. But overall, I think Ava Max did very well with her vocals. They shined very well. And execution-wise, I think there were some moments in this record that did have its flaws. There was pros and cons with this record. The pros being that the beat, her singing was the highlight. The cons being basically how some of the songs were executing and just, I don't know if it was like precise and on point at times with certain tracks like Don't Click Play, Sucks to Be My Ex, Loving Myself, Know Somebody, and yeah, those were the only songs I would say got 4.5 out of 5s, but other than that, I think the record's good for how it sounds, and if I were to give Ava Max Don't Click Play a score, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 for this record. It's a good record. Definitely recommend you check it out. It's not the best record from her, but it is a good record for how it sounds. It's not as good as Diamonds and Dance Floors because I really enjoyed that record. This one is a good follow-up, too, in its own way. So 8 out of 10 for Ava Max Don't Click Play. I hope you enjoyed this album review tonight, and thank you guys for watching.